Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today we have Cate Han and Stacey Seltzer from Hudson Lab School. Cate is the founder of Hudson Lab School and co-founder of Learning Pods. She has helped startups raise over $100 million in early-stage capital and worked with entrepreneurs to build company value through mentoring, strategic planning, practical problem-solving, and fundraising. Cate began her career as a quantitative analyst at Sanford C, Bernstein. She co-founded Launch Collective and set up the finances for Managed by Q. Cate is a Chartered Financial Analyst. She earned an MBA from Columbia Business School and a BA from Barnard College. When starting Hudson Lab School, she was inspired by Bayswater Maria Montessori School, High Tech High, Little Leaf, and Portfolio School. She enjoys surfing, yoga, and TED Talks. Stacey, co-founder of Hudson Lab School and partner at Prehype, a group of entrepreneurs who help established companies and VCs facilitate spin-outs, incubation, and venture partnerships. Prehype runs programs for companies such as Lego, Newscorp, Verizon, Kaplan, and Coca-cola, identifying new innovation and business opportunities and creating new adjacent businesses through a proprietary lean incubation process. A startup junkie, Stacey has also worked with numerous startups from Managed by Q to Barkbox, CuteCircuit, Joost, and others. Stacey received an MBA from Columbia Business School and a bachelor's degree from Brown University. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we have the great pleasure of speaking with Cate Han. She's the founder of Hudson Lab School, and Stacey Seltzer, who's a co-founder of the school as well and partner at Prehype. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here today. I feel like this is long overdue. Please tell us more about yourself for our audience as well.
Hi, I'm Cate. I'm the founder of Hudson Lab School, co-founder with my husband, Stacey Seltzer. Hudson Lab School is located in Westchester, right above New York City. And we are a progressive project-based school entering our 5th year. And we're all about teaching kids how to design and build a life in which they can thrive.
And it's okay, you can say that you're the founder and I'm the co-founder, because that's usually that is the way it is. Anyway, I'm Stacey Seltzer, co-founder of Hudson Lab School, and also one of the founders of the venture studio co-created with Prehype and a partner at Prehype, which is a network of entrepreneurs. And my background was just early on in my career. I studied education, and then I had this long shift into the other, like the rest of the world, and took this long journey into business and investing and ultimately entrepreneurship. And so when Cate got excited about building the school, I was like, all right, I'm in.
So Cate, can you tell us why did you get excited about building such a school?
Yes, so we have 2 daughters who are now aged 11 and 8. And when we first started our first daughter's education, it was in the Montessori system, which is very child-led, and it's all about understanding, having a deep understanding of what children are interested in. And that just makes so much sense, because if you're interested and you're engaged, you're learning. And I always think about a lot of, particularly in summer camp, I think about it like vegetable lasagna, because kids love the pasta, they love the cheese, they love the tomato sauce. And then you're, as a parent, you're putting in all the vegetables. So a lot of what we do, I think, is we do really exciting and fun projects both at school and at camp, and the kids are learning so much, but they don't necessarily think about it as school, right? They think about it as, oh my gosh, I'm so excited about learning about immigration, right? Which could be a very staid subject, but for them, the creative process really pulls them in, and they go so deep in ways that a textbook never can. And so it was really important for us. Then when we moved to the US when our daughter was 5, and by 1st grade, the teacher, one of her teachers said to us, I can't teach just to her, because I have 19 other kids. And I was actually, to be honest, kind of expecting that, because that had happened to Stacey, and his mom would tell me, when he was in second grade, he finished his entire math book and the teacher yelled at him for going ahead.
I was terrified. I spent my entire third grade year just being like, I don't want to do anything because I'd been yelled at for like moving ahead in the thing. And it's that kind of thing where you're like, you want to keep kids creative, you want to keep them excited about school and about learning. And we just felt like the system, the traditional system and kind of, where education was and is, didn't allow for that kind of creativity to kind of continue.
Yeah, or the pace that's right for each child, right?
And so being entrepreneurs, right? Cate and I both came from this kind of entrepreneurial background. We were naive enough to think like, oh yeah, we can start a school, right? I guess the longer version of that is in finding, in feeling this problem very much ourselves with our own kids, we started to say, well, what are the alternatives out there? And so we went to look at other schools around Westchester and then around New York, and ultimately started speaking to educators around the US and talking to people in Philadelphia and Atlanta, and particularly on the West Coast in California, where we got tuned into project-based learning and the approach taken by a bunch of schools out in California, and particularly the High Tech High down in San Diego, which for those who don't know is actually not just a high school, it's actually a system of, it's 3 full campuses of kindergarten through high school that all take this project-based approach. And at that point, we were like, well, we could move to San Diego, or we could like stay where our family is in New York and where we're established and everything, and open a school. And as I said, we are, as entrepreneurs, we are naive enough to think like, okay, we can do this.
Yeah. We'll go back also that, like, why that naivete is kind of like necessary ingredient almost in starting anything. But it's very interesting to see to hear like your collective learning curve on this and how Hudson Lab School came about. Really starts from our own childhood, right? Like, what did not work for us? Like, where did we feel we were stopped or restricted or pushed into learning something, and all things that were forced on us. And also, like, and you can like dive into this further, like when it's very incentive based too, how that kind of like lost focus on what are we learning again, or are we just memorizing for the grades? So we have our own experiences, and then we see that in our children, like firsthand, how they learn, what is beneficial for them. So that's a huge motivator, I'm sure. And then you're also seeing like the entire industry and the landscape and some problems that are like coming out of it. And I guess like one, well, I don't know why, like, well, there's a lot of conversation around like the criticizing the current educational system and how it has to be more like student-based, right? What is getting in the way of this being adopted more? Like why does a school like Hudson Lab School or even Montessori schools have to be more of a niche in our present day? Like what is getting in the way for this to be acknowledged further? Because I have a feeling like all parents are kind of already like recognizing the issues.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think when we, so Cate talked about how we moved back to the US, we've been living overseas, and we kind of like got reintroduced into the traditional system here. And yes, we were surprised by how little it had changed from our childhoods. But if there was one change that was very clear, it was this focus on testing and a focus on kind of content like regurgitation, right? And you asked the question like, why is it so hard to change? Well, we understand why the entire system went to testing. It's because we want to measure something, right? And we want to measure progress. And well, how do we do that? We start finding the KPIs and we start finding the elements that we can measure. But it just feels like the kind of pendulum has swung too far. And so everything that a system was oriented around was, now that it was the test taking and the way the school was being measured was how the kids were performing on the test. And so the test becomes the dynamic around which the entire system is set up. And to us, that really struck us as, wrong on like a basic level, but particularly wrong for the future that we're all facing, because students these days have all the information in the world at the tip of their fingers, right? Like, once they're allowed to get a phone, and we can have a whole discussion around when a kid should be allowed to get a phone, but whether it's on a computer or whatever. Yeah, exactly, different podcast. But like, all the information is available to them. So it's so much more important to understand how to process that information, how to choose the right information, how to choose and understand and integrate.
How to do a Google search.
Well, how to do it. Yeah, exactly. How to find the right information. And then how do you build a narrative around that? How do you collaborate with others? How do you incorporate that information into multiple disciplines? But it is totally understandable why the system got that way, because the test taking and performance measurement on stemming from test taking is what's driving.
I think a lot of parents make decisions around education, I think, that are fear-based, because they want to make sure that they're not messing up their children, right? Because in the future, if they don't do this, are their children going to miss this opportunity in the future, right? And so I think that a lot of times Stacey talks about, like, we become what we measure, right? And so unfortunately, there's this push and pull between like parents and schools, and everybody wants the best for the kids, right? But it's just a matter of being able to communicate that information between the school and the parent. The other piece of this that is so challenging is that project-based learning actually requires so much more of teachers' personalities, right? And it actually mandates a mind shift and a reframe about your role as a teacher, because in current graduate programs, let's say for education, a lot of what teachers are taught is how to be the person in front of the classroom, and they call it chalk and talk, because you're at the chalkboard and you're talking, even though there are no chalkboards anymore. But really, as a project-based learning teacher, you become the what is it called? The lead support, right? The lead learner.
Yeah, the lead learner. You're the coach.
Yeah. So our teachers actually, they have to go and do their homework. So what they do is at the beginning of a project, we set up at the beginning of the year, this is going to be our learning arc in terms of the theme. So what last year was voices. We thought it was really important, and we leave it very open. So if teachers and students have an interest in thinking about voice from a science perspective, right, and sound and voice, or because of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was very important about the voice of each individual and each individual groups of people, different communities who all want to be heard. There's so many ways to take it, so we give teachers that freedom, but then they have to sort of set up the framework and think about, we think about it like building the foundation of the house, but they don't know what it's going to look like, because the children are actually going to have influence in terms of the direction. They know, okay, I want my students to be able to write like a personal narrative. I want my students to understand, some like science-based, skill. But at the end of the day, they're not going to understand the details, because they need the children to have their engagement in order to be able to really drive that learning in a way that would not be as successful or as deep or as retained in the long term if the teacher were to define that.
Yeah, so many things coming to my mind as I'm listening to you guys. First, like going back to kind of like the testing. I mean, we see that in like almost all industries, no? Like one of the big analogy that immediately pops into my head, like, is the healthcare industry, where that entire standardization and no one person is same with another, but we are treated as if we are all should be in between certain numbers or should have a certain reaction to something or whatever. And we're not necessarily getting personalized care for our own health, or like a holistic care in that sense too. And that also goes back to, I guess, like standardization, performance in hospitals. And this is again going back to who do the doctors report to, right? Like, what are they responsible of? What do they need to like provide for their employers, so to speak? That kind of also limits them in spending quality time with a patient versus like looking at things for 10 minutes and letting them go, right? Like, I'm sure no doctor goes into the field of like studying like such a difficult profession and be like, I'm just gonna do like a, you know, standard job and like check my patients like every 10 minutes and, you know, not like cure cancer. No, that's not my mission. I'm just gonna like, I'm looking forward to that. I'm sure nobody goes into that profession for that. And it almost feels the same with like teachers, where what are they genuinely responsible of in the end? The students, right? Like the best interest should be that, but I'm sure they're bogged down with so much admin or expectations also, either on the school admin level or even like higher, like tying back to like Department of Education and all of that. Like, what are schools' responsibilities to that? And suddenly it becomes like how the systemic issues kind of like influence these very influential people in our lives to really like craft our either health or future, right? Like it's you know, I'm sure there are like handful of people who are still like among, like, despite everything, still trying to figure out their own way, do an extra homework. But like in the reality of things, if we're just like putting people down into so much pressure or comparison for like numbers or benchmarks, whatever we are doing, it's going to be impossible to sort of like zoom out and be like, wait, what was our like initial reason, like why we were doing this again? And I'm hearing like so much of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a great analogy because, right, doctors don't go into medicine like, right, you know, be like, oh yeah, I want to, you know, have 6-minute schedule with every patient every day and like really be jammed and stressed and everything. And teachers are exactly the same way, right? They're not going into education being like, yeah, I'd love to stand at the chalkboard and like have a lot of kids who are like, you know, not paying attention and like lots of parents making demands on me and lots of administrative, like they go in because they care about the kids, they love the kids, they love education, they love learning. And so, yeah, the system makes it really hard for them to you know, I think as you were saying, like go back to like, why did I get into this in the first place? Which led me to kind of two interesting, you know, two places, which is part of the way that we approach this. And Kate was getting into that, is to give the teachers a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, we set out the kind of broad strokes of here's the kind of arc for the year, here are the things that we want to accomplish as an institution.
Yeah.
But the individual, you know, teachers, and actually it's even, we really encourage our teachers to work in teams and work as a group and work much more in a collective kind of way, in a collaborative way across both the grades and as you know, in teaching pairs. But it's up to them to like really implement. And so that's a huge difference in the way that we approach things and a traditional approach. But the, you know, the other thing that you're going to comment, you know, made me think about was just the tremendous opportunity now to both in healthcare and education to begin to personalize things, right? And so one of the things, you know, it's super one of the things that spurred us to open Hudson Lab School again was that technology is evolving so quickly, and that every kid who graduates from university is going to have to be able to retrain themselves over and over again into new careers and new interests and new paths.
Yeah.
And so, but and I think a lot of times in education, people are kind of fearful of technology. You like, it's like, as we kind of talked about, like, when does a kid get what is the right age to get a phone? What is are robots going to be teaching our kids, like all this kind of stuff? And yet I think there are really interesting ways to use technology to have our kids, like our approach at Hudson Lab School is to have the kids be able to harness that technology for creative uses, be familiar with it, be exposed to it so that they can stay creative and collaborative and be users of that technology, not be just consumers of content on it, or worse yet, consumed by the technology. And I think that's true in medicine as well. It allows there are things that we can do using technology to really look at the personalization.
Yeah.
And to begin to do that, but we're just at the beginning of it, right? Like, we're just at the moment where we can begin to do that. And the reason that I got that just perked me up is because we're doing some of that work right now at Prehype, is working with a bunch of entrepreneurs who are looking at how can we study like humans, how can we study people, what are the tools and things that we can use, what's the technology we can apply to actually deliver a super personalized service.
Yeah, and like with those shifts too, it's like almost very important to kind of like create more awareness and education around like, well, what might the future look like, and what type of an education is going to help you get there. Once somebody told me that like in the future, like the Ivy League schools are not necessarily going to look at your like, I don't know, like SAT scores and whatnot. They're going to look at your portfolio. Like, what have you done in life, right? And that was like so interesting to me, like, because if a generation of sort of like technology users, more entrepreneurs, like there's also a lot of like, we're not in a generation where like maybe our parents, like they were okay with going into a corporation or institution and work there for 30 years, right? Like we're seeing more entrepreneurship, more like flexible working models, and people like I've heard from a few maybe Gen Z interviewees on another project research where they like the idea of having a portfolio of careers. Like they didn't necessarily were like, I'm going to go into this company and work for them, right? So when we're talking about, and also on top of all that, we have like life longevity aspect, right? Like as we're living longer, if the world doesn't come to an end, but as we're living longer, what does even education look like? Like, do we really stop at the age of like early 20s and we move on with our lives? Most probably not. And so when there's so many moving components and technology kind of like enables this like dynamic infrastructure of things happening and at a much faster pace, we're going to really have to look at like, what am I really learning as a skill set in order to be able to cope with all of that? Like what you guys are talking about in terms of like analytical thinking, or really being able to collaborate around a narrative, like all of that are like almost like survival skills, right? And like you would be put in an environment, let's say of like business, how would you navigate this situation, rather than like, I'm, learning geometries, whatever subject, which, and but then when we're talking about this too, then it's almost like, it feels like we need to sort of flip the scenario where like currently we have children following a steady curriculum until college, and then in college we're choosing what we want to study. But I'm almost seeing like we need to start to study whatever we want to very early age, and maybe we get more general information later in our lives. Like what do you think about that? It's like very like where we're going and how things are evolving, like the gap seems to be growing very much so from the traditional educational system. So in addition to having students kind of lead the content, what else do you see that really needs to change or shift?
Right. I see it as a real balance, right? There's a certain set of information, that's foundational that kids need to learn. So we can't let them choose everything, but we need to, again, set up the framework to say like, these are the skills you actually need to know that are going to be useful for college. One thing that I think is really interesting is the idea of math in calculus. The funny thing is my dad is the only person that I know who uses calculus in his job. I'm not friends with physicists or, rocket scientists or any, that, but so he's the only person, but I took calculus. I actually did really well in it. I don't remember a thing about it. Right. And so, but meanwhile, if the math track, for example, is like advanced statistics, I've used that a million times. And it's not just because I was in finance or went into business. It was because, as I'm thinking about, when if I go for a walk on the beach without my mask, what's the probability, right? That I may or may not get sick. So that's something that I think all of us could, is really useful. So it's sort of the idea of saying, here are things that you definitely should need to know, but we want you as a child to be able to understand who you are, what your strengths are, and then who you are going to be in this world, right? And so we don't know what the future is going to look like. When I think about right now, and I think about like our watches, and we're walking, I think in Australia or Singapore, and I was on a video call on my watch with somebody in California, and I was like, oh my God, this is like the Jetsons. I don't know if you know that. But the cartoon where they have the video calls, and you're like, we're in the future. It's so amazing, right? Next, we're going to have like a shoe telephone or something.
I'm not sure that is step forward or step backwards.
But, so we're not going to know what the future is. So the way that I always like to think about it is that, and this is, I think very common in the design world, but it's about understanding process. And so understanding what is the right problem to be defining, right? And so that's step one. And then B, what's the first step that I'm going to take towards solving that problem? Because, and then not being married to solving that particular problem or to a particular solution, right? And so what we're teaching kids from kindergarten is that process of being able to identify, okay, what is the problem that we're going to be defining and working towards, and then B, what's the next step, because that's something that is going to work no matter what industry you're in, right? Or what problem you're trying to solve. And I think.
And it's been so amazing and rewarding to see, so we're in our 5th year of operating. And so we have a number of students who have been with us now for 4 years. And it's so rewarding to see them begin to take on that, those characteristics, and to really embody that like kind of process approach, over content, to ask the questions, to try and understand their users. As part of the work that I do at the Venture Studio, we've also helped some universities design entrepreneurship programs. And entrepreneurship, I helped Hollins University design its entrepreneurship minor. And as part of that, I was teaching the entrepreneurship kind of 101 course down there. And the students would come up to me and they'd say, all right, well, what's going to be on the final exam? Like, it's not about content. This is about entrepreneurship. So like, you got to define the problem that you're interested in solving. Then you got to go understand it, like talk to your users and see if that's the right problem. You got to like, the final exam is that you've done the work, and like will depend on what that work looks like. And they kind of stare at me and go, okay, but what's going to be on the final exam? And what's cool about our kids is like that. You ask a 4th grader at Hudson Lab School, like how they would approach a problem. And in fact, there's a story about this, which is we're looking now at extending out to high school. We're currently K through 8. And so we got to think about how do we support the kids in high school. And so we're looking at that. And in talking to some other educators, they're like, well, why don't you, see what your kids at, Hudson Lab School would want. So we go and we ask a 3rd grader actually, or the third grade class, what do you like? What would you guys expect from high school, and what would you want? And those third graders didn't say like, oh, I want this or I want that. They immediately just went to, well, I'm not in high school. I don't understand anything about that. So I think my first step would be, I need to go talk to some high schoolers and understand what the current experience is. And then I think I'd want to talk to some adults who have been through high school and see what they didn't get out of that experience. And then we got to talk about where the school is, because where the school is going to like really affect the dynamic of what we're trying to create. And I'm like, I'm blown away by the like, they immediately went to process, not trying to be like, like, let me raise my hand and tell you that, the answer to 2 + 2 is 4, or worse. And Kate, you always talk about this, and where we started in like the focus on testing. One of the things that is so upsetting about that is it, in the drive for like perfectionism or the drive to get the answer right, it makes it so kids actually don't even respond. Right. And so like worse yet is the kid like not knowing what the answer to what should a high school be like, is that they don't say
definitely. Definitely. Kate, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I was just gonna, in response to you were talking about like Ivy Leagues and the portfolio. I'm not sure if you're aware, but this past year, school year, all of the Ivies went test optional because a lot of the facilities were not open for kids to go and take their SATs or ACTs. And what happened as a result was that applications spiked at all of these brand name schools. And so there actually exists, it's called the Mastery Transcript Consortium, or MTC for short. And it is a group that is actually trying to change the admissions process. But you can imagine, it's what a complex system that is in college admissions. Malcolm Gladwell has the most amazing podcast about US News and World Report and the college rankings. So I would highly recommend listening to that.
It all goes back to testing, right?
Yes,
and like, what are you measuring, and like, how do you do that? And then, like in that case, the whole false premise of the test in the first place, or the measurement.
Right.
It
really makes you question what is school for.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I remember talking to a few parents before who were like more interested in sending their children like early on in like a Montessori like school, or basically student-based learning school. And I actually know people who kind of were hesitant, not because they don't believe in it, but because either the school like ended in like 5th grade or like even like earlier. And they're kind of like, well, then if I take that child and put it into this like other system, how are they going to cope? Like that, the fear of that also kind of like controlled, because now we have this like kind of awareness around this is not working. So we see these like new schools that are coming out that are actually in the right direction. And then there is this like the mega like beast of the current education system and all the schools, and the gap in between like being able to, and like going back to you like scaling and what does high school look like, the gap in between, let's say like elementary school and college, or like even from like junior high to college, like that really scares parents because this is like a wild experiment. We don't know, maybe those kids are just going to be like, let me assess the problem in this environment. This is not working for me. But like, how is that going to be received by the teachers at a traditional system? Like all of that like question mark just defaulted some people that I know to just like, well, this is safe, which is like terrible to settle on.
It's the fear-based decision making around education.
Exactly. So I guess the question is, how do we scale, despite how intricate, complex system this is, that needs to like change over time? How can we influence by like, I'm sure not everybody who like recognizes this have the entrepreneurial thing to like, just like, let's just start a school. But like, what are some other solutions or things that we can be mindful of to like sort of like push this change?
So I think, you know, one of the potentially positive outcomes of the pandemic, and this may be like to say a pandemic as a positive outcome.
Lots of silver linings.
Right. So,
Yeah.
you know, is that it's forced so many schools, so many districts, so many parents to, you know, all of a sudden education was being conducted in their living room. And the parents got to feel the experience of the teacher and the frustrations of the teacher and the, you know,
see their own child and how they are. I mean, obviously it's a little bit different because it's online and not in person, but they could get a sense for how is my child in school for the first time.
Yeah.
That's right. And so one of the real like silver linings of the pandemic, which has thrown into high relief the huge inequities in the system as well, is, all right, it just has forced, you know, schools, systems, teachers, administrators, parents, and even students to like really reckon with that question that you were talking about, which is what is school for? And then in a little bit of a way, like force so much change that it allows for a like maybe a reset or maybe a new like set of like, how do we really want to do this? And so you see it is definitely kind of, you know, green shoots and grassroots. It's not, you know, the entire system at once, but I think that's what, you know, where it needs to start is you see more and more articles about, you know, public school systems and private school systems, everything that are changing, that are doing things like moving away from test taking and going like, we want a more portfolio-based approach, or we want a more competency-based approach.
Yeah, where it's more about student mastery as opposed to, because I think what happened as a result of the pandemic is that historically you group kids by their age. So all 8, 9-year-olds are in third grade, let's say, and they're all taking the same math and going at the same pace, right? And now because of online and because of the social inequities from the pandemic, as a result, the gamut of an 8 and 9-year-old could range anywhere from, let's say, like first grade math material to, you know, 6th grade math material. So it's forcing all the school systems to think about, okay, we need to personalize, and it's not just about how old you are anymore. And let's hope that more systems move in that direction, because otherwise so many kids are just going to fall through the cracks and they're going to say, oh, you gave up on me.
Yeah. And it's interesting when we're talking about sort of like the silver linings, I guess never ever before the conversation of mental health was so dominant globally. Yeah. And it was often discussed the pressure of these like standardized tests create on children. And, you know, I grew up in Turkey. In like our system, the university entrance exam is 1 day a year. If you mess that up, you have to wait for another year. Like the amount of pressure, like children getting sick that day, or like going into depression afterwards, or even suicides, like it's insane. And like, but we did not talk about mental health. I feel like, you know, this like generation is much more cognizant about like mental health already. And just like acknowledging it's a normal thing to like care for yourself mentally and all of that. But I feel like last year sort of made that conversation global and like universal across generations too. Like now there's more recognition around that. And I'm hoping that also kind of influences decision making in the education system, and that, yeah, like these pressures are not working for us or families.
Yeah,
completely agree. And there's a huge problem there for, you know, for all students, and so I think it is encouraging because a lot of schools are grappling with how do we support our students, and what does it mean to support our students in a more holistic way than like, you know, overall. And that's been very core to our approach as well, is that we kind of take a whole child approach and are really focused on the social emotional. You know, Kate talked about even just using our ARC last year in terms of the project work and talking about what does it mean to have voice. You know, and voices like allowed for that flexibility around like the reflection and how do we support our kids and what does it mean to be an individual and everything. And so like we're super tuned into that. And I think more and more schools and districts and everything are again the catalyst being very dramatic in the pandemic, but I think there's the potential for really positive outcomes because of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is not to underplay the hard work that needs to go on to do that, you know. Yeah. But that again goes back to where there's opportunity, right, and where there's opportunity to begin to make both incremental and you know more wider change.
Yeah, and the more there is like collective understanding and awareness between all the disciplines and decision makers in this like change in terms of the student well-being and future changes and trends in our lives, the more, I guess, in the right direction we can move. I'm sure it's not going to be fast. It's probably going to take generations, and maybe the new leaders that you guys are sort of educating and raising at Hudson Lab School will kind of like instigate these changes, but it will come. It's inevitable. It just like, how can we get there like sooner? I think we could talk about this like all day. So I'm gonna like have to cut it, unfortunately. But before we wrap up, I do want to ask both of you individually, to anybody who wants to go into a space and push boundaries, make progress, create change, what would be your advice to them?
Mine would be around failing and an acceptance that it is a step in the process of learning, and not to take it too personally. As somebody who has been a perfectionist, it is so hard to embrace, especially if you've gone through the traditional system and you've spent 22 years trying to do your best and not make mistakes because that would go on your permanent record. The best thing that you can do for yourself is to say, if this doesn't work, then let me just try again in another way and learn from this mistake. So just to put it into context, having two daughters and we're just about to start the school, and every day I have to tell myself, we may not open right this fall. This was our first year, and that's okay, because we can keep working at it and then we'll open next year. And that I have to talk the walk, walk the talk.
Yeah.
Because my kids are there watching me, and this is everything that I'm talking about in our school, and our, our open houses. It's about letting kids fail as part of the learning process. Obviously, you're not gonna, the whole point of failing is to say that's not the end of the road. That's just step one. And so to actually accept that for myself. I think
I love that. There are two steps, like one, like obviously like treat failing like prototype iteration, and also lead by example and like modeling for your children and the students. Great. Stacey.
Well, I think my advice to someone wanting to do something new is it's a corollary, I guess, of what Kate's saying, which is like, just go get started. It can be really hard sometimes to like take that first step because of the fear of failing, because of the, where is this going to work out? And the answer is, it may or may not work out in that immediate first step, but it's going to work out long run. And I think a lot of times we have a saying, which is, we like things that have small starts with big finishes, or the potential for big finishes, which is, what are those, first steps we can take to start doing something new? And so I guess, to put a button on it is like to have the courage to take that first step, because you're going to do, you're going to do amazing things, and it might not happen all at once, might not happen the first time, but you're going to get there. And to make change, we need lots of people taking those first steps.
Yeah, this goes back to originally what you said, like be naive, right? Like going in.
Oh, definitely.
Because there was definitely more courage in that naivete for sure. So
Yeah, and I think, on the naivete thing is like, it also takes, I think there's a really valuable thing in having people who have just a different set of experiences and a different, perspective to, make some change and like, and we had to come up a big learning curve, and we definitely kind of like balanced towards, we learned many, many, many things about what it takes to run a school and to work with students and teachers and parents. But by being a little bit naive about it, it allowed us to start, and it allowed us to bring some new ideas into the space, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much both for doing that and starting Hudson Lab School to like model other educational systems and also schools of the future. And thank you so much for making time today. This was such a treat. And any, like, I guess, like before, like close completely, updates about the school or yourselves that you want to share that we should be following up or looking forward to?
I mean, we're super excited to be opening in our fifth year. We've got 65 students. One of the coolest things, and maybe we'll do this in the next in another edition.
Part two.
Hudson Lab School is so unusual in that we are co-located in a nursing home. And we didn't talk at all about community or the impact of intergenerational learning or any of those kind of things. But one of the things I know we're really looking forward to is the end of the pandemic and being able to bring back the kind of intergenerational work in a big way, and to continue to like look at what it means to build community around the school. So
amazing. Well, that's the food for thought for everybody then.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you both
for doing this podcast.
So fun to talk to you.
And for having us.
And that is this week's episode of What's Wrong with the Podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Links can be found in the episode description, and you can also find them on our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz. If you found value in the show, we would appreciate if you could rate us and leave a review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget to join us next week. Thank you for listening.